Good morning, boys and girls, and welcome to today's children's message for March 27th, 2022. Unit 8, Into the Land, Session 1, God Defeated Jericho, Joshua 2 and 6. Boys and girls, I am so glad that you are here today. You know, for those of you who have been with us for the past few weeks, you know we've been talking about this wonderful book, the Bible. And the Bible is a primary way that God reveals himself and his plans to the world. We've been reading through the Bible for a little at a time, learning about the many stories about what God did long ago. And as we've studied the Bible, we've learned a lot of different miracles. You know, God miraculously gave Adam and Sarah a son despite their old age. And then God miraculously rescued his people from Egypt, and gave them a way through the Red Sea. And God miraculously provided for their needs in the wilderness, and then miraculously made a way for them to cross the Jordan River into the land he had promised. But learning about all these miracles raises an important question. And here's our big picture question. What is a miracle? A miracle is something God does that usually cannot be done so that we can know he is all powerful. A miracle is more than something unlikely happening, like maybe a basketball player makes a last second shot, full court shot to win the game. Now that would be truly amazing and unlikely, but that's not really what we would consider a miracle. A miracle is an event which involves an immediate and powerful action of God designed to show what he is like. So when God works a miracle, there's no explanation other than that he is the all-powerful God. So for the next few weeks, we will look at other miracles God has done and discover what those miracles help us learn about God's goodness, power, and love. So God's people, the Israelites, had finally entered the promised land, but other people were already living there. But God had plans to help the Israelites conquer the land. And today we'll learn about the first major city that they had. God's people had to defeat, and that is Jericho. So this is the picture for our story today. And it is called God Defeated Jericho, and it's found in the Bible in Joshua 2, chapter 2 and chapter 6. So I'm going to kind of summarize this for you. So the Israelites had finally arrived at the promised land of Canaan. But there was one problem, we said. Other people were already living there. So God's people just couldn't walk in there and set their tents. They had to go into battle against their enemies, and they had to win. So Joshua, remember our leader Joshua, and this is Joshua, he sent in two spies in to see what it was like. And the spies stayed with a woman named Rahab. And Rahab had heard about God and believed in him. And she wanted to help his people. When the king of Jericho came looking for the spies, she hid them on her roof. When it was safe for the spies to leave, Rahab said, "Please be kind to my family since I have been kind to you. When you attack Jericho, please don't kill us." So the spies promised to keep Rahab and her family safe. But Rahab had to listen and follow some rules. Rahab had to tie a bright red rope in the window so the Israelites would know where she lived. And when the Israelites arrived, the people of Jericho hid behind the city's strong walls. If you can see the walls on the side there. And God told Joshua how to conquer the city. Joshua friend Joshua would lead the people to march around the city one time every day for 6 days. But they couldn't talk. They had to do this quietly. And they would walk around the walls of Jericho one time for 6 days. And then on the seventh day, they would march around the city 7 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then on the seventh day, the priest would blow, we'll pretend this is our priest, and he's blowing his trumpet. He would blow the trumpet, and then all the people would shout, and the walls of Jericho would fall down. And then the Israelites could go into the city and take over. So Joshua commanded the people to march around the city one time. The priest blew the trumpets, but no one of the Israelites spoke or made a sound. And then they went back to their camp. They did that for 6 days. And on the seventh day, they got up early and marched around the city 7 times. And on the 7th time, the priests blew their trumpets. And Joshua said, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city." And so the people shouted, and the wall fell flat. And the Israelites went into the city and captured it. And they kept Rahab and her family safe because she had helped the spies. And Rahab and her family lived with all the Israelites from then on. God was with Joshua, and everyone in the land knew of Joshua and what he had done. So, how does that apply to us today? We don't have any walled cities, and they're not going to come tumbling down. But you know what? How does it apply? God gave his people instructions. The Israelites didn't have to wonder what to do or come up with a battle plan. In fact, God came up with a different one. In his grace, because God loved his people so much, he told the Israelites exactly what to do in the battle. And then when they followed God, God gave his people victory. They obeyed him, and he kept his promise. God showed his power, and Jericho's walls fell down. God gave an enemy mercy. Rahab's people were enemies of God's people, but she helped the Israelites. And so God saved her from the city's destructions, and they welcomed her to join God's people, which leads us to our Christ connection. When I think about God's people marching around Jericho, I wonder if they kind of felt silly. They spent their years in wilderness and then miraculously crossed the Jordan River. And then the first city they come to had huge walls that seemed impossible to overcome. In fact, Rahab's house was in the wall of the city. And God's plan didn't involve climbing up ropes or catapults. It started with them just walking. But you know what? No matter how the Israelites might have felt at first, when God moved, his people surely felt that thrill of a God-given victory. Just think how spectacular it was. Like you're walking around and you're shouting, and then all the walls collapse. And yet, the one wall where Rahab was saved. By faith, Rahab believed God would win the battle. And when the Israelites attacked Jericho, Rahab and her family received mercy and became part of God's family. The Bible even tells us that Rahab's home was built into the walls of Jericho. And just think about how she felt after the walls collapsed. And even more than physical safety, God gave Rahab spiritual safety. God saved Rahab because of her faith. He didn't just bring her into his people. He made her part of the family line of Jesus. So if you look when you read about Jesus, it has Rahab's name there. God sent Jesus to rescue sinners. He lived that perfect life. He died on the cross and rose again to defeat sin. And his resurrection is an incredible miracle, just as the walls of Jericho falling down was. The resurrection proves that Jesus has won the battle against sin and death. And everyone who trusts in Jesus receives mercy and becomes part of God's family forever. And that is an even greater sense of joy than what Rahab had. Now I'm going to show you one thing. I have this egg and I'm going to crack it into this container. So I cracked this carrot, and you see there's an egg and an egg white. See the egg white around there? And now I'm going to do something with this bottle. I'm going to take this bottle and I'm going to separate the yolk from the white by applying pressure on the bottle. So see, I squeeze the bottle and I'm going to put it right on top here. Hopefully I can do it with just one hand. See how I have the egg, and I was able to separate the egg from the yolk, the egg white from the yolk. And they're very different, but you know, they're the same in some ways. When the yolk and the white are touching, they can be separated. But once I do this, oops, I forgot my spoon, but I'm gonna have to do it with my fingers. If I poke the egg and I mix it together, now they can't be separated. Right, when you mix them together and whisk in the right, they're bound together, and they can't be undone. And this is what makes me think about Rahab. Was brought into God's chosen people. At first, Rahab was separated from the Israelites because she was a citizen of Jericho. But God brought her in and made her and her family part of his people. He made Rahab part of the family line of Jesus. So this also reminds me of how God welcomes us into his family when we have faith in Jesus. Once we join in God's family, we're part of his family forever, and no one can pull us out, no matter how they try. In God's family, we have joy. Even when we go through hard times, we can have joy knowing that God will care for us and give us everlasting life. Isn't that wonderful? Now that takes us to our Bible verse. Our key passage comes from the book of Psalms, and we've done Psalms before, right? A psalm is a poem or a song, and some psalms tell God how good he is, and some tell God about sadness or anger, and some tell other people how God is. But this psalm reminds us that God is wonderful and works miracles. He is all-powerful, sovereign, and good. So this time our Psalms is Psalms 77:14. You are the God who works wonders. You have made known your might among the people. Psalms 77:14. Isn't that wonderful? We can memorize that one and just remind us how wonderful God is. Okay, boys and girls, let's close in prayer. Father God, you are good, and your mercy goes on and on forever. Only you can work miracles. You forgive sinners and welcome them into your family. Give us joy, Lord. Help us to praise you and experience that wonderful life you give, even when times are hard and we go through challenges. Help us look to you day in and day out. In your Son's most precious name, amen. Okay, boys and girls, we'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.